Welcome to our latest episode of the Limitless podcast. Today we are going to discuss the future of coding in a world of AI tools. Since I'm just a host, welcome everybody, I'm not really the best person to tell you stuff about this, which is why we have a very interesting guest today. I welcome Dan Ilies. He has been a software developer for more than 10 years. He's now also a content creator and very much focused on mobile application development and helping others to do it better. In this capacity, he also has quite some experience already with AI tools, so I'm sure we are going to get a lot of answers to our questions. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Sasha. Great to see you, and thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. At the end of the day, I think you are helping us more than I'm helping you, but let's see how it goes. Without wasting any time, let me start with our first question, which is probably foremost in many people's minds. What is it that these AI tools like Copilot or Claude or even ChatGPT can actually do or promise to do for people working in software development?
Sure. So I think they can do many different things at different levels. So starting with level 1, and the first version that we've seen of such AI tools was GitHub Copilot in the beginning, which was advertised mostly as smarter code completion assistant. So just like you have in your IDE, in your code editor, you have those short auto-completion features for years now. Copilot promised to be more helpful on that side and to generate like entire functions based on your comments or on your context in the project, and that was working quite okay. And then a big jump forward was when the chatbots were released, ChatGPT being the first one, and then Claude and some others, where you could actually talk to them and explain context in your own words in English and ask for specific requests, and then they could generate the code for you. Of course, now I'm saying it more as a software developer myself, but they could also help you with brainstorming ideas on how to implement stuff, not just generating the code. So with these chatbots, you had another level of usability, I would say. They could do more than just the initial code generation model. And then we had something even better, the agents, the AI agents, which besides responding to you and generating text and images, they can actually perform operations on your project in this case. Let's say they can create files, folders, change the structure of your project, do some configurations and setup. So they can do much more than just reply to your requests. So these would be the 3 levels that I'm seeing AI tools present in our tech life.
Okay, so obviously in theory or on paper, this sounds pretty great, right? But how does this actually work in real life? How is your experience with this? Does it really work as advertised, and is it that helpful, or is it more marketing still, and in real life we are still struggling?
There is a bit of marketing like in everything. Of course, if you watch the videos from OpenAI and Claude, they advertise it as being as close to perfect as possible. What I've seen in the last 2 years is that they have evolved quite a lot. So initially, I remember using ChatGPT, and the replies were oftentimes not correct. So, for example, a few times it suggested me to use some properties that were read-only and suggested me to edit them. And if I told it it's read-only, then suggested something unrelated, and then came back to the initial suggestion. So it wasn't really helpful. But as the models improved, they got better and better. And I also started to use them for simpler things. So maybe create the initial structure of a screen, like the UI, or implementing a simple function that calculates something. So I'd say they work quite well for the simple tasks. And then as things get more complicated, you have to either provide more explanations or just break your task down into smaller smaller tasks that are easier to understand and solve by the AI tools. And also the code completion works better if you use it for a long time on the same project, so it understands the whole context. It's still far from being autonomous, but they keep improving.
And with which models did you have the best experience so far? Because we know there are many different models out there. Some of them are better for certain tasks than others. How is it with coding or programming?
The models and solutions that I used the most were Xcode's built-in code completion model, which is actually free in Xcode for iOS development, but that's very specific for iOS development. I've been using, so this is kind of like the level 1 that I talked about earlier for code completion. On the chatbot side, what I used the most was ChatGPT for 2 reasons. In the beginning, it was free and I wanted to test how it works. Then I got the Plus plan, and that allowed me to use like the more advanced models like 4.0, and now we have 4.1, which is advertised as being better for coding. So I'd say these are the ones that I use the most, 4.0 and 4.1 from OpenAI. And as an AI agent, the one that I work with was called Junie. Is from the company JetBrains, which builds IntelliJ IDEA and other tools for developers. And that's a built-in agent in these IDEs from JetBrains. And it's a nice experience to just give it a task and see how it can create files and do more than just generate code. What I also liked about ChatGPT's models and ChatGPT's plan is that the cost is predictable. So it's $20 per month, regardless of how you use it, and you have some generous limits. Whereas for Claude, for Claude's models from Anthropic, I've heard good things about them, but considering that you can't really predict how much it will cost you to use them, I haven't tried them so much yet.
I understand. Now, I know that you're more focused on the programming part, but I would assume that AI or these models can also help us in the remaining development cycle, because it's not just programming, right? We have testing, of course, we have prototyping, we have UI design, etc. You already mentioned that you could feed it with or ask for it for some basic UI designs. Did you already have experience with that part as well, or do you completely outsource everything that is not really programming?
No, I don't outsource it, especially in the context that I'm working now, doing more than just programming. It's also, I also have responsibilities on the product side and also on testing. So for this, I tried using, so if we take like the software development lifecycle, talking about product strategy, I used it a bit for brainstorming product ideas. I can't tell if it's good or not because I haven't implemented those ideas fully yet to see how they perform in the market. But it was helpful at least to give me new things to think about. Then I tried it for UI design for my mobile apps that I was working on. Just try to generate some images, some icons in the first place, and then to ask it for UI improvements, like giving it a screenshot and then seeing how it would recommend me to enhance it, to make it more beautiful or user-friendly. Now, for this, I didn't find it quite useful. Oftentimes, what it gave me back was not consistent or was full of mistakes, like not only text, but elements that were misaligned, or not changing much, so it was 90% the same. Besides this, with testing, I didn't really, I used AI tools for generating unit tests, but not for automation tests that could run automatically for your app or for your website and test specific workflows. For those, I think we have solutions that are still working well, like these automated testing frameworks. Let's see. I think it also can help a lot I mean, you can use AI tools for generating documentation for your project, for handing it over to some other developers, and for just documenting everything for your team.
Mm-hmm.
And even in project management, I would say, for adding more context and more details to the tasks that the team has to implement.
Well, with so many different use cases, it's probably not a big surprise that more and more people are adopting these tools, or at least trying to. And it's not just individuals, it's also organizations, of course. I found a study, and I have to look up the numbers here so I don't say anything stupid. So Stack Overflow, very well-known website, of course, did a study in 2024 where they found out that 63% of professional developers are currently using AI in their development process, and another 14% were planning to begin using them soon. So that's 3/4 of professional developers basically committing to using AI during the development cycle. The thing is, this was in May to June 2024, so more than a year ago, and I think it's safe to assume that by now these numbers can only have gone up. So are we going to face a world where we can't get around AI anymore when we're developing software? And which parts of the coding workflow are actually being automated or enhanced by AI in real life, where it makes things really better and faster? And on the other hand, in which areas is it less helpful? You already mentioned a little bit that it doesn't do so great with UI design and UI improvements, which I understand. So I suppose it's more focused on the logical part, meaning syntax, etc.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I'll take the first question. If we're heading over to a world where we basically cannot avoid AI, I think slowly we are. To some degree, I mean, even if it's just a small part in our work, it will be there, because not using AI will make you, will hold you back. It's just like a classic comparison that maybe we hear these days is like how when tractors appeared for agriculture, I mean, you could continue to just manually work on the field, but it was much more efficient, and eventually you are left behind if you didn't use these machineries. So I think it's similar with AI for software development. You will be slower and a bit left behind if you don't use them, at least for the parts that can be automated and that can be improved, not only in terms of speed, but also in terms of quality, I would say. And for that, I think you need to have some experience in the software development field, not only as a programmer, but also as a tester, as a project manager, as a designer, to understand what are the parts that make sense to be used in collaboration with AI as much as possible, and what are the parts that you should insist more on as an individual. And for this, I'm not sure if your second question was exactly this, like which parts is it useful for and which parts is it not. This was it?
Yes, very good. I like this parallel or this metaphor you brought up with the tractors, right, when they were introduced. Yes, of course, you could have gone on tilling the field by hand, but yes, not so competitive. And this also meant that you had to learn how to use a tractor, right? And yes. I think developers find themselves in a similar situation right now. Their role is clearly evolving. So question is, are we really going from quote-unquote code writers to something like, I don't know, system designers or prompt engineers in this field? And what kind of new skills should developers or people who would like to be developers soon actually learn nowadays? Do we still need to learn programming languages and frameworks like we used to do until now? Or is clean and pure prompt engineering perhaps even enough?
Mm-hmm. I think, yes. I think the way we work is changing. It's similar to what you said, going from coding everything ourselves to prompt engineering and coding, and eventually reaching that level where you have some tools that are more visual, and maybe you can just arrange a structure for your website, for your mobile app, and just giving it some prompts, and the tool itself, the solution itself will build that mobile app or that website, and you will have to just check if it does what you expect it to do. It's another abstraction layer, just like we're not writing assembly code anymore, and not even C++ code, which C++ is still similar to today's programming languages. But in many modern programming languages, you don't have to worry so much about memory management and manually allocating memory, because they do that for you in the background. So I think AI adds another layer on top of that. And software engineers and people working in tech will be more of system designers, as you said. And yeah, they have to learn this. Prompt engineering is one skill. And the overall, the general understanding of how system works. So it's not so much about learning a programming language or a framework anymore, to touch the second point you mentioned, but it's more like understanding the fundamentals of software development, how front end and back end are connected, how a mobile app talks to a server, what is a database. Then you don't have to write the queries for the database manually. The AI can do that for you, but you still have to understand what's happening when you select something from a table, or what's happening when you build, when you link a button to some code. So probably we won't see as much code as we won't write as much code as we did so far, and with time we won't even have to see as much code, only like the parts that we really want to inspect.
Okay, question here. So I'm obviously not a programmer, but I do use various AI tools rather frequently, and I meet the same experience as millions of other people, that very often what I get from these tools is not exactly reliable, right? It's either completely delusional, or it's just incorrect, or it's outdated. Do we have a similar problem in coding and in programming as we have in more creative tasks, in the sense of not technical creation of code, but creating texts or creating user interfaces or these kind of more artistic things?
Yes, definitely. And sometimes the problems, let's say the challenges, are visible from the start, because what you see that the AI generates, it's not working as expected. Or sometimes it's very surprising. I remember an example where I just wanted to see how ChatGPT performs on something that I had on a UI, and I asked it to add rounded corners to some element that I had, and it did, and that worked well. But at the same time, it changed the color of another button without me asking. So if you just like take the code and put it there, okay, let's say that this is something you can see. You run the app, you see, oh, the color is changed. But maybe at some point it does something you cannot see. Like it deletes something from your settings. It creates or it changes the code in ways that you don't test on the spot. So it's very important to actually fact check everything, and everything that AI generates for now, and not only for now, but also going into the future.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in my simple and sometimes paranoid mind, I see two main challenges, I believe. The first one is, if people don't really learn programming as such anymore, but rely more and more on AI, then A, they're probably not going to check these things, and B, even if they wanted to, they are probably not able anymore. Because unless you're an experienced programmer already, I suppose it would be very difficult for you to review any code created by an AI and completely understand it. Because, and this brings you to the next risk with AI-generated code, sometimes it might do things that we did not intend, and that might actually pose a risk in terms of security. Because it might be sending data somewhere, perhaps unencrypted, or it might be leaving backdoors open on purpose or not, I don't know. But how can we tackle this? I mean, I think this is going to be more and more difficult, especially if more and more code on the web is generated by AI and then reprocessed to teach AI further, right? So, the chunk in, chunk out, basically. The worse the code is that it learns on, the worse the code that comes out has to be.
Yes, exactly. It's a challenge with this because we reach the point where AI is trained on AI generated data, and if it goes wrong in the first or second iteration, then it's a downward spiral from there. So I think for the examples you gave were perfect. Security security issues is a big topic that we need to look at when using these AI tools, and probably having two layers of checking this. So one should be an automated layer where you have many automated processes that don't rely on AI that much. They are just like a pipeline of operations that checks everything and checks for vulnerabilities in your application after some new code is generated. And also people with experience that already have experience, and hopefully new people getting into the tech field, learning from these existing software engineers what to look for and what to check, and also manually checking some of the critical stuff in each project. So I think it should be a combination of, yes, automated processes, and also experts in the field which understand the fundamentals and the vulnerabilities that could occur.
Okay, let's look at this whole topic a bit more from an organizational point of view rather than an individual programmer, because all these new things and opportunities also bring certain challenges and risk for organizations. One of the key topics obviously is how do we as an organization keep our source code safe, right? So it does not leak on the web, no other chat models get trained on it, nobody can find it, etc. What are the best practices there?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a right answer, because if you think about it, even if you put your code on GitHub is now owned by Microsoft. So in theory, your code is private, of course. But yeah, it should start I think it should start from in an organization. You usually have the people that are leading teams, let's say team leads, architects, and so on. And if they come together and establish like a set of ground rules, like, all right, let's say a checklist to have on each project or for each sprint that runs on a project. And this can include things like I'm having a lot of ideas, and I'm not sure how to organize them, because it can be a long answer. But ideally, in any organization, you should have these technical leads, I would say. Just like before, they kind of were responsible of looking into new technologies and seeing if there's something that they should adopt or they should look into, like a better framework for front-end development, a better solution for mobile development. Now, a good part of their work needs to be into this AI validation, AI research, and establishing some ground rules that the entire team should look into and should respect. I think the actual rules can be different from one organization to another. Of course, accepting these things that you already mentioned, like keeping the code private and making sure that it doesn't leak and so on. And yeah, leading by example like that, I think it will help also like junior members to respect the same set of rules.
I mean, I can add a bit from the IT point of view, because this is what I usually do, help with keeping things safe in our organization. There is also the challenge of all these different AI tools that people want to integrate with the normal tools like email or calendar or tasks, etc. So that's another potential leak there. But especially for programming, there is probably currently just two things you can generally do. One is to stick to, well-known providers and sources and not jump on the 735th AI super tool that just was released by some obscure company somewhere in the world. So stick to the known providers. And the second one would, of course, be the option to set up a local, so your own instance LLM. That's, of course, something that not everybody can do, not every organization would consider worthwhile, but it's probably the safest approach, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you have the resources to run LLMs locally, then that's a good way of keeping things private. Yeah, and what was the first one you mentioned?
To simply make sure that we use only trusted providers. Right?
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, good one. Kind of letting others test it before you, I would say.
Yes.
But yeah, of course, you have these already well-established companies with great reputations that they will not risk by, I don't know, adding something shady to their product.
True. So as you've seen, there's a lot of opportunity in using these tools, but there's still quite a few risks as well, and none of these risks is actually negligible, so they're all kind of important, from security to quality. The question is then, why are organizations still so eager to actually adopt this? I know it from our own company, so we're also completely on this bandwagon and trying to use AI in a useful way for our programmers, for our project managers, and also people in the more administrative area like HR, IT, etc. And coming back to software development, there's yet another study done by GitClear, and I will just throw a few numbers at you because I found them staggering. So they found that after analyzing 211 million lines of code, that the amount of code cloning, so basically just copying code, has grown by a factor of 4.
Oh, wow.
At the same time, we see that the rate at which recently added code is revised or reverted, basically refactoring, is projected to double from 3.3 to 7%. And then the last one, I know it's a lot of numbers, but the last one is that actual refactoring dropped from 25% in 2021 to less than 10 in 2024. So with all these confusing numbers, for me, the message here is that AI helps us to create more code, more lines, but is not so eager to actually review existing ones and make them better. This is also something that I heard from the developers in our own company already, that AI tools tend to create new code, more code, rather than improving existing one and optimizing it in the sense of removing what is not really necessary. So how do we then, as an organization, measure the expected or desired increase in efficiency? Because this is what we want as a company, right? We want people to enable to work with AI, so at the end of the day they can do the same work with less effort, or same effort, more work. But how can we actually measure this?
I think these could be separate topics because, in my opinion, you can still be efficient while using AI to generate more code, at least in the short and mid-term. Of course, that may be even more efficient because you're not refactoring anymore. You just generate new code and it works.
But doesn't your code get worse then? Because I always hear you need to refactor your code every once in a while to make sure it keeps running smoothly and efficiently and fast.
Yes, that's why I said in the short and mid-term, because in the long term, as the more code you have, the more parts there are where something can break. And also it's harder to be understood by new team members or by existing team members or even by AI. So in general, the idea should be to achieve what you want to achieve in terms of functionality with as least code as possible, but also like keeping it readable, because of course you can find these code structures that in one line it does 5 things, but then it's confusing for both for you and for your teammates. So it's that sweet spot of writing enough code to make it clear, but not too much so it's unnecessary, an unnecessary amount. And I was very surprised by the first fact that you shared about the increase in repetitive code. But this is something I also noticed in my experience with using AI tools, because in general, with your prompt, you're asking it to do stuff and it generates that for you. So it depends a lot on you to ask it, reuse this code. And I'm trying to do this quite often, like in my code, giving it like a part of a class or something to ask for how could this be improved, I mean, reduced, but also how can it be made cleaner. So it depends a lot on you as a professional to ask for that, to have that mindset of let's not just make things work. And this was true even before AI, because I've noticed this tendency sometimes, even at myself, to copy paste some existing code from another project that worked, or from another part of my project that I needed, let's say, the same functionality on two screens. I had that tendency to copy paste the code, but then, of course, the classic example, something needs to change, you have to change it into places, or if there's a bug into places. So exactly like you had to be mindful before AI to make your code clean and to find that sweet spot I was talking about, you should do this with AI as well as a developer. So that's something you need to ask for, to keep in mind all the time.
So this is where prompt engineering again becomes crucial. And honestly, I'm not really surprised, because also in all the ways that I'm working with AI, so non-programming ways, this is the key. Having a correct prompt, or engineering your prompts a bit to get better results, makes a huge difference.
Yes, definitely. And not only this, like how you formulate your prompt, but asking for, writing those extra prompts to check for cleanliness, to refactor, to improve what you have, not just to generate new things.
I have to admit, I created a project in ChatGPT that does nothing else than creating prompts for ChatGPT projects. So
Me too.
Yeah,
Me too. It's good.
This is good. Yeah, I think that's a really great idea, because you basically tell the prompt generation project your instructions that you want to have projects based on certain best practices. I also added some documents there where it's explained how to talk with ChatGPT, etc. And then I just open a new chat, say, I need a prompt now for this or that, and it simply gives it to me. And this I then simply paste into a new project, and I have a much better quality in responses in this new project coming for all kinds of questions. So for example, I live in Romania, as you know, but I'm not Romanian, I'm from Austria, and I do not understand tax law in Romania very well. So I asked my prompt generator to give me a prompt for a ChatGPT project focused on tax law and accounting in Romania and the European Union. And now I just ask this thing all my questions for doing my annual declarations and whatever other optimizations I might need. Works great.
That's perfect. That's a great strategy. And a plot twist, not even us Romanians understand it so well. So I think I could use that too.
I can send you the prompt.
Perfect. I'm also using ChatGPT in a similar way. So I have that prompt generating chat that's separate. But yeah, this is actually very important and useful. If you have at least one separate chat for each topic. So for example, I have an iOS assistant, an Android assistant, it's separate. Then maybe you have something specific, iOS for this project, if it's something you're going to work on for a long time. So it keeps everything in that context.
Yeah, that's actually the second huge benefit also in my opinion, that you have a project around a certain topic and then in there you have individual chats, but you always have the right context. Because before ChatGPT introduced these projects, I found it quite cumbersome that you always had to, reiterate what is the context and tell it again how to behave and what to say and how to output, etc. So yeah, that's really nice and saves a lot of time.
Yes, and that's also a big selling point for these AI agents that are in the code editors. So you have the chat in your in the cursor editor, for example, which is like a Visual Studio, or in other tools. So then it already has the context there, and you don't have to re-explain it every time. It has access to all the files and so on.
Speaking of access, That brings me actually to my next question. We do see already in the news, in public media, that there is a lot of discussion about intellectual property when it comes to image generation especially. So everybody can go to ChatGPT and ask them for an image of whatever they want, and it will be created. But once again, in order to create these images, they had to learn somehow and somewhere what the prompt means in order to understand it and interpret it correctly. And of course, learning happened with real pictures that real people did, whether they are photographs or paintings or illustrations. So there is not an ongoing discussion that these artificial pictures, these AI-generated images, are infringing the intellectual property of the people who created the original ones. Now, we are far from a solution in this discussion, so we don't need to go there, but the question is, are we facing something like this also in the coding area? Is the code that our tools or the AI tools use to learn also intellectual property, even though it is kind of publicly available?
That's a good question. In general, since the code AI models is trained on is public code, like on libraries and open source repositories and so on, there shouldn't be a problem with this. But of course, there are again those types of licenses that already you can use this open source code, but you cannot just resell it, take it and resell it.
Exactly. So there's a lot of material out there which is publicly available, but only for certain purposes. So for example, you can use it privately as much as you want, but you are not supposed to use it in commercial context to make money out of it.
Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking is that maybe not to the same degree, but also in software engineering, you can have this problem with the code. One way to stay away from it is if you ask it for specific things and then you use specific things that it generates, maybe not so complex. So sticking to building a structure, building a functionality for your project instead of relying it too much on building your entire project. Like you have these tools that can now build you a website from start to end without you writing a single line of code. And for those, there's a higher risk of maybe having something in your code that's not entirely public and that you could continue to use. So in my opinion, if you use it for specific parts, then you have more control on the things that it generates for you. But it's something that, as you said, for artistic content, it's a hard problem to solve.
Well, good news for us is we are not in a position to solve it anyway, but at some point there is probably going to be some legislation and regulation around it. However, there's one more question I wanted to ask you, which is very relevant to a lot of people listening, which is, of course, what should I, if I am a developer or I want to be a developer, do now to make sure that the evil AI is not going to steal my job eventually? So I understand from everything we discussed today that we are not yet there, right? It's not the case yet that I can say, I will just fire 20 developers and instead get 2 people who can do prompt engineering and everything will be fine and working. Obviously not. But I also know from discussions with individuals, a lot of people are worried, right? Because they see the trend, they see the discussions, they see the expectations from managers that everything needs to be faster and better and cheaper. So what is it that I can do as a developer to make sure that I stay relevant and I will still have a job in the next 2 years or 5 years when it comes to software programming?
Mm-hmm. So there are a few things that you can keep in mind. The first and the most simple one is to try to intentionally use some of these AI tools, let's say ChatGPT, because it's the most accessible to everyone. So even if you have to do something you know how to do, try to intentionally use it for a small part of that to see how it works. And then you'll get the feeling, because that's how I started as well, and many people I've worked with. It's hard to jump from not using it at all to using it to a very high degree. So starting it small, you'll also see and learn what are the parts that it can help you with. So for example, as I said, for mobile development, it can help a lot with generating an initial structure for a screen, or a function that converts data from a type to another type, or from an object to another type of object. So you'll notice this, and you'll be more happy to use it for your future tasks, because you know it saves you time and the risks are minimal, and you can evaluate that code. So using it like more and more in your daily work, and also realizing this is a shift that is happening. As we talked before, we're heading to a world where it's normal to use AI for almost everything. And I think it's also, maybe it's not an answer that's easy to hear, but you need to be proactive and to try to be, let's say, in the top half of developers, of the people that you work with and people that you interact with. Because I heard the jokes at some point, and it's kind of true. So even if, let's say, half of the developer jobs on the entire planet will be, let's say, half of the developers will be fired. If you're in the first half, you will be fine.
So true. It's like when you're being hunted by a bear. You don't have to be the fastest, just faster than one guy.
Yeah, but I think also besides this, realizing that what you do in your daily job might change, and to accept that fact as soon as possible. And again, there's a lot of, just like before, being a programmer didn't mean that you have to stay and write code for the backend that you processes stuff. You could maybe do something more artistic. You can work on front end, on mobile, create user interfaces if that's what you liked more. Other people were more into cybersecurity and they didn't care about the UI stuff. So going forward, I think that's still true. And depending on the type of company you're working at, the people that you work with, and the project itself, you can find a project that relies that it's more aligned with your preferences, and maybe for that type of project you're using AI more or less depending on what's your preference as well. So I think staying open to that and realizing that things are going to change and keep up.
Yes, I think for us as individuals, that's probably it in a nutshell, right? So AI is not going to go away. I also do not believe that AI is going to replace us in entirety, but I do believe that people who know how to work with AI will have an advantage over those who don't, simply, right? So like you said, you don't want to be left behind, but should really try to stay on top of the topic. And of course, but that's a very different discussion, it will be a challenge for schools and universities, because by default, schools and universities are behind with what they are teaching to what is happening in the world. But I think things have never happened as quickly as they're now doing with all this AI topic. So it's going to be particularly difficult for them to keep up and teach the students accordingly.
Yes, and teach them relevant stuff that they will be asked for after graduating and when working. Because you said it well, that it was already a problem, but that's a smaller problem. That you learned old technologies, let's say in computer science, and then when you started working, you saw all these new frameworks and programming languages. And also the way of evaluating people, like, will we continue to evaluate how people memorize stuff, or will we switch to evaluating how are they solving problems regardless of what tools they use to solve them? And on this note, I think Google or Facebook announced recently that they will allow software engineers to use AI during interviews.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of, that's a big shift, because these companies usually gave those coding challenges at interviews so that you had to solve yourself, and they were not easy. So now we can say that they're not looking for people who can solve them by themselves, but more like solve them in any way. And of course, they could evaluate the quality of the solution and say, all right, this is made with AI, but it's a good solution. So we
Yeah,
will
I suppose
rank this
in
higher.
this case it's probably more relevant how the people got to the solution, right? So I would assume that
Yeah.
these companies don't just look at the result, but also at the process, how the person got there. But yeah, it makes also sense. Now, if you want people to use AI, then you should check how they can use it during your job interviews.
That's a good one, yeah.
All right. Well, this brings us to an end. Thank you so much for the nice discussion and the many answers we received. I do think there will still be a lot of questions coming, but that's in the nature of things. So, thank you, Dan, for being with us today.
Thank you, Sasha, so much for having me, and it was a pleasure to have this discussion. And for any further questions, I think both of us are happy to share our perspective.
We sure are. And that's it for today. So, thank you everyone for watching or listening, depending on your medium, and see you next time.